Hello, Hrvoje Morić. Welcome on the Nexus. I am very pleased to have you on here. And to our guest, Hrvoje is a host and producer of the vital Geopolitics and Empire podcast, where as far as I know, you interview plenty of guests. I think we have also had overlap of guests like Professor Glenn Deason and others. And you talk about global empire, geopolitics, technocracy, the dangers of various technologies, and other considered controversial international issues. If I'm not mistaken, you're also a graduate of the Geneva School of Diplomacy and a former professor of international relations. And if I'm not mistaken, you are currently at home in Mexico. Is that about correct? Did I
I
summarize it?
am in the thick of it. I used to joke, but it's not a joke anymore. Narco country, driving by burned vehicles, and apparently in town there's still some shooting and burning of vehicles going on. So, Viva Mexico!
That was exactly going to be my first question. I saw it on the news. It looks like an actual, well, close to a civil war. And we also got the pictures of these crazy, well-equipped, well, soldiers, if you want to call them that, from the cartels, right? Are you safe? Are you okay? Is like, how is it?
Yes, yes, we're safe. I'm actually preparing later today to record a solo podcast on it myself. We do have to be careful with some of the images that are, you know, you're in the thick of it. So it's the fog of war.
Hmm.
And there's propaganda from all sides, and it's unclear exactly who the enemy is, right? I can get into that, but I've seen people share some of these videos you're referencing where cartels are dressed up like Mexican authorities and tanks. Some of so some of those have been around for years, right? So that's one thing. People are sharing them as if they're right now. There are also AI videos, but
Oh, they are?
basically, no, there's a few, but I'm just stating that we have to parse things and try to be as accurate as we can. And yeah, it is crazy. So, I can give you my experience.
Hmm.
Sunday we were leaving the house, and I fight with technology, and I try to keep my smartphone off. I don't like using it, and it's on airplane mode. And I'm leaving the house, and I didn't know what was going on Sunday, and we're on our way to work, and I start passing by one, two, three, four narco blockades, as they're called. And so what they were doing effectively, apparently they captured El Mencho, right? I call him the Mexican Osama bin Laden. And so he was one of the top cartel guys. Nobody knows if he's alive or not. It's like the Osama bin Laden situation. And he's maybe 100 clicks outside of where I am, Guadalajara. And supposedly the Mexican authorities got him with the help of U.S. intelligence, and then all hell broke loose. And then the cartel basically just it was a strategy of tension. You're familiar with Operation Gladio?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a Gladio strategy of tension. They didn't target civilians. Basically, they were kicking people out of buses and their cars and burning them, which are called narco blockades, to block streets. And I think they did hundreds of those. And then, you had maybe 20, 30 Mexican authorities dead, soldiers, National Guard, whatever, another equivalent amount injured, and then probably similar or higher numbers of cartel members killed and apprehended. So that's the state of play. And I'm hearing reports that there's a lot highways are still having narco blockades. You had it from Puerto Vallarta and many states across the republic. It's happening. But my view is that the U.S. is pressuring Mexico to clean up shop because they want to create a North American Union, a technate, just like the European Union. And also, it's unclear as to when I say who are our enemies, the cartel, the CJNG, the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, who's who can possibly be behind them, right? Like CIA. They have 80% of arms from US military arms, uh,
In
Israeli
Ukraine.
Mossad, training in Ukraine and Israel. And so again, it's like the Azov thing, the ISIS, who financed and armed ISIS? The West. And so this is why I'm saying it's really unclear between these. So what we can say definitely involved in all of this is U.S. government and whatever that entails, military intelligence, is Mexican government, are cartels, and then within that sort of who has the higher percentage of control, it's hard to determine. But I think ultimately the consequence is they want to do a bit of cleanup to have this North American Technate, North American Union. Yeah.
Well,
So
well, thank you for that overview. That was much more comprehensive than I anticipated. Um, do you do you reckon the C, I forget the abbreviation, the C cartel, basically, and Mencho's cartel, it does not stand a chance of overtaking the government and actually throwing Mexico into a civil war? It's just like a momentary thing, right?
no, it's possible. No, this is why I say you don't know where the government begins and the cartel ends.
Ah, okay. So
So
there
no, I
is
can tell you,
room.
I know former authorities, and they tell me the government's infiltrated through and through with criminals. That's a fact. But then again, when I say the criminals, their links to, I don't know, CIA or whatever, it's hard to determine these things. And I don't like to be like some analysts who just say, "Oh, the cartels are run by CIA." It's
Yeah,
not that.
mhm.
It's not that simple.
It's rarely that simple, is it?
Right. And I guess to your so one thesis that I have, as I said, their goal is the North American Union. And I view these unions as supranational, globalist, technocratic, totalitarian, like the EU. The EU is the prototype. And as if you recall, for the past few years, they've been pushing the narrative of civil war in the United States, right? The movies of civil war, even the alternative quote media, which I think is linked to the deep state, has been pushing a Civil War 2.0 narrative. Steve Bannon, Alex Jones, you name it, because they want it to happen. But not enough Americans want to leave their sofas and Amazon and Netflix and pick up arms. So they
Some of
generate.
them, some of them will have a very hard time picking themselves up.
Exactly. No, I heard, here's a funny story. I heard from a friend who works with firefighters in the US, and they complained that one of their biggest, the firefighters who get house calls in the US, this is not like I just heard this direct, that the biggest, the biggest calls that they get, the most of them are people who have fallen and they can't get up in the US because they're so obese. Like
Oh,
it's not a joke. And I used to live in America, and I've seen people that are I've never seen that are so obese that I've never seen anywhere in any other country. But that's a
that's
side note. My
bad.
so my point was, and so they've been generating deep events like the Charlie Kirk assassination, like other types of events to radicalize both sides,
January
right?
6th comes to mind, among others,
You,
right? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you name it. I mean, I even believe the Butler assassination attempt on Trump was staged by them.
Yeah, that one. Well, let us get a bit more organized. So the way I want to do this with you, because I have heard a lot about you. I have heard well, not that much yet, but some from you, enough to get an idea, and plenty of questions to fill up, well, multiple episodes. But I'm going to try to condense the most important ones down here. So the way I want to go about this is I am torn in my personal information bubble space, which I obviously try to be as unbiased about as possible, since I'm a physicist, I have physics training, so I'm also very aware of, well, also psychology, very aware of biases. But be that as it may, so what I want to do with you is I want to take the question of whether multipolarity and this transition to the new world order is or is not a psyop. Like, is it authentic, or is it like, like most events in history, unfortunately, have been. And so the way I want to go with you about this is I want to present to you and also to our audience, like I have a sixth level of awareness, right, of consciousness. I want to present that idea to you and then get right into multipolarity specifically, right? So the way it goes is I grew up like most people here in the West, being taught that we had finally conquered the vicissitudes of human organization, political life, and so on, and we finally reached this pink epitome of human civilization, which is liberal democracy, as Fukuyama put it, the end of history, right? And like most of us in this blogosphere, podcast sphere, we are surrounded by conscious people who know that it's not as rosy as it seems, right? And it seems like this bubble is now growing. I'd say thanks to multiple factors: the internet, the brazen nature of the empire, U.S. empire being on the verge of collapse, and all that becoming mainstream knowledge. And that's also maybe potentially epitomized by Mark Carney's speech at Davos, where he just laid out the rules-based order for the fraud that it was, right? And so the way it goes, those 6 levels that I talked about before of consciousness is like level 1, pink democracy, everything's great, high school material, and that's where you are usually as a 16, maybe 18-year-old. Level 2, maybe it's not so great. After all, we went into war against Iraq. There was bombing in Serbia and so on and so forth. Level 3, you realize, wait a second, are we the baddies? Are we actually the bad guys? We are committing the genocide over there. We did start that war over here. We did kill 1 million people over there and so on and so forth, right? And level 4 is you realize that it doesn't matter who sits in the White House. There is something much deeper going on. Trump is realizing in Iran, for example, policies written down in 2009, which passed the Persia paper. Ukraine war was planned in 97 with Brzezinski, and then all the way to 2019, the Rand Corporation paper, yada, yada, yada. Level 5, you realize even behind those financial Wall Street elites, there might be even higher up elites, such as perhaps, I don't know, some names, Rockefellers, JP Morgans, the Rothschilds. And here we're starting to get into maybe this occultocracy, as you put it. Level 6 are these orders. I don't know, the Masons, the Medicis, what is it, like the Illuminatis and Black Societies. And so my personal stance is, I get to level 4. I see the corporations. I can trace them back through who finances, I don't know, the National Endowment for Democracy and those NGOs that give us all the human rights abuses by the bad autocracies, right? And then maybe I get occasional glimpses into the higher elites, maybe Epstein kind of class elites or even higher. And so my knowledge becomes very hazy around level 5, 6. And so let me throw this back to you. First of all, what do you think about these? I mean, I just came up with them like this week. What do you think about these 6 levels of consciousness? Does this roughly cover more or less the way you see things also?
Yeah, I think it's a good framework. And yeah, I mean, I would say I'm up at level 6. It's just that, as you said, it's hazy, and I don't think we'll ever know. Um, and I like to approach it as academically as possible. It's like
Yeah,
a
right.
black box, right? And we have academic sources. You mentioned Illuminati, but when I use that term, I'm referencing the 18th century
Mm.
documented, Illuminati group, or you've got Bilderberg or Trilateral Commission. You've got the Berggruen Institute, who said he wants to supplant the Bilderberg and Trilateral Commission, and of course, he's mentioned these European dynasty families. You've got the Venetian nobility. People still, talk about. I found a Bloomberg article from 2 years ago that said the Liechtenstein, right? One of the royalties, the prince or whoever of Liechtenstein. It was Bloomberg article that said they've maintained that land for 800 years. So what does that tell you? That the wealth that they have. And Rockefeller, this is another story here in Mexico. 6 years ago, I was living in Kazakhstan, and during COVID 1984, as I call it, or COVID 9/11, I returned to
That is good.
I returned to Mexico, and I saw them building out what is effectively a 15-minute city, a smart city. And then I came across the government documents that said Guadalajara is a resilient city, and I'm like, what is a resilient city? And the thing that they were doing, like, it's clear for people who are on level 6, if you understand the plan, um, they were building out mass public transport and digitalization, and removing individual, automobile transport. And I'm like, I see what they're doing, but I'm thinking, where are they getting the money for this? And I found the documents that resilient cities are financed by the Rockefeller Foundation. So this is
Philanthropic Foundation
right,
number 277, right?
Right. And I said I had lived here for a decade, and I said they don't have the money for where's the money coming from? The local government doesn't have this money. So I found the documents. It's not, level 7 or whatever. It's says Rockefeller Foundation finances the development of resilient cities, and resilient cities are effectively these 15-minute cities, smart cities, electronic concentration camps. And then you realize they're being built out across the planet. But yeah, I would yeah, I like it's a good framework you have.
Okay, so I think it's at least something, right? I'm not fully happy with it, but let's work with it for the time being. So uh, the next question upon that is, usually in order to, well, this is also my scientific nature, right? Usually in order to fix a problem, you need to understand it. And if you don't, say if you lack anything beyond level 5, 6, like is it just Wall Street? Is it something behind Wall Street? Is it something behind Wall Street? Is it like yeah, linked by dynasties, by cults, by some sort of weird spirituality or something? Anyways, do you think in order to fix, very broad question, do you think in order to fix the world, we need to fully understand all 6, potentially 7 or more levels?
Well, I mean, you, you would have to, yes. I mean, because if you sort of leave them to their own devices, they will continue doing what they're doing,
Mm.
right? And so if you can't know who they are and stop them, they will just continue with this madness. And so I think that's the heart of the matter. And then I mean Epstein, there's different threads there. I think a lot of the Epstein network, as you said, it's getting on its way. I just read this morning they've arrested Lord Mandelson
Mm.
in the UK, and I think someone else. But again, there are tiers, and so I'm not as optimistic. I'm coming at this from a certain spiritual perspective where I view the train is going to reach its final certain destination, and throughout all of history, never in all of history have we ever known who's pulling the levers. If you go back in time, generally we've gotten, I think, close to many, but yeah, how are you going to stop them if they remain in the shadows?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a tough one then. Let us, so there's so many branches we can go off on here, but let us talk specifically about multipolarity. So to our viewers and listeners, if I may just summarize in a nutshell, we have had about maybe 600 years of Western dominance that started with Western Europe, with the conquest of the Americas, conquest of Africa, of India, etc. And that moved on to basically US hegemony starting from World War II, generally speaking, I'd say. And ever since, we have had the US empire ruling the world, being the hegemon, having the world reserve currency, dominating the financial systems, owning more than half of the world's gold reserve, etc., etc. And so now we're witnessing this transition, this very quick vanishing of the US empire, financially, militarily, societally, culturally, and we're moving on to a new world order, which many people call multipolarity, embodied by the BRICS states, BRICS organization, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Spain, according to Trump. And yeah, so this is about it in a nutshell. And so let me put it this way. I believe you, Hrvoje, you say that this is a PsyOp. This transition is not genuine. And many people will say it is genuine and put their hopes and trust in a new world order. And I tend to obviously have a lot of hope towards that, but I keep hearing about, and I'm very aware of the dangers, knowing a bit about history and the role of past world wars and how these powerful elites have profited no matter what the outcomes is. And so I would say personally, I'm at a point where I'm skeptical, but I still believe it is genuine. And the way I would go about this is I would say what I have heard most people say, and maybe you, is three types. Let me present the argument, maybe the counter arguments, and then I'll let you bounce off of that. So the way I see it, there's usually three types of arguments of people who claim that the whole idea of multipolarity is a psyop. The first is something about the origins. For example, person X coined the term and he or she was, I don't know, WEF or is part of the Rothschild Bank or worked at IMF or whatever. Exactly. So that's the origin or the coinage of the term, right? I believe BRICS itself, you mentioned, was coined by a former WEF. That's a good example.
Young global leader, and I think it was Jim O'Neill. Was it? I'm forgetting now. J.P. Morgan, I think. Bank.
Yeah, some bank, one of the elite institutions in any case. Argument two, that a country or an organization uses technology that is broadly similar to those used by globalists. For example, I don't know, digital payments, facial recognition software, EID, etc., and therefore it must be globalist. Which, I mean, it's a strong indicator, but it's not an airtight argument, right? And point three, would be something along the lines of BRICS is building a new global financial system, or China is pushing this new global governance system, therefore it must be globalist, which I think in a strict definitional term is true, which does not, however, mean as a consequence that they are techno-feudal, tyrannical global governments that they're pushing, right? And so just as a short counter to these arguments, what I would say, the first argument, origins do not mean that I mean, if an organization finds its origin in a, let's say, globalist person, it does not necessarily mean that therefore the organization still follows those values, right? Also, especially if it's just coining the term, maybe someone has a lot of influence and then they coin something that already existed, which doesn't mean they own it, right? For example, one example that comes to mind is Alex Mercouris from the Durand coined the term aggressive attrition, but he has no control over it, right? So yeah, that is the first thing. Also, organizations tend to develop a life of their own even after the creator, goes. Argument two, that I would say some technology, and that might not be to your liking, but I would argue that some technology is unavoidable simply because of evolution and the way society works and convenience. For example, the internet is probably here to stay. Phones, computers, even AI facial recognition probably cannot be avoided altogether. Obviously, we can do something against the whole totalitarian architecture, like owning data, etc., and we have to do something there urgently. But if you look close enough, I have looked, for example, at Russia implementing the EID, which is often used as an argument that Russia is totally through and through globalist, right? And I haven't looked into great detail, but at the EID, I looked with some moderate detail, and it's very similar to what we have in Switzerland here. We have a thing called Swiss Login, which allows me to log into the local municipality and get some documents there that I might need, allows me to log into the app that I have to buy train tickets, etc. But it's not an electrical identity. I mean, it is an electrical identity, but it's not like a passport biometric or anything like that. And Russia implements something like that. It's not an EID as far as I know. Similar thing can be said about the Chinese social credit system. It's just a criminal record system. But yeah, so that's argument two. And argument three, BRICS and the UN are precisely about global governance and a global system of trade, right? That's what the Belt and Roads Initiative is about. So using that as an argument to make them, well, to say that they're tyrannically globalist, I think is, I mean, obviously you have to look into it closer because it is using the architecture of globalist technocracy, right? But that does not mean that it is that, right? So this is what I would say where I stand. These are the three usual types of argument that I find. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. Is there something else that I miss? And then we can get into the weeds of it. What do you say?
Yeah. I mean, I hear you, but I just I often say we'll have to agree to disagree. And I see some of the people that you've interviewed. I've interviewed them as well. A lot of them I file under my category, as I call them, multipolaristas.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've interviewed years ago Glenn, Matthew Ehret. I haven't interviewed him. He didn't want to come on my podcast. Angelo Giuliano. I've interviewed was it Ivan Kachanovsky, Alex Krainer, and I do follow Pascal Lotaz. And
Mhm.
then just to get this out of the way, I believe not all, but I believe that there is good evidence that some of, again, it's a spectrum. You've got people that are genuine, you've got people that are grifting, and then people that are knowingly working as operators. And you can apply that to the alt media as a whole, the entire podcast space, as well as to the like the Steve Bannon, the MAGA
Yeah.
categories, whatever category you want. But I truly believe I've seen things that some of these multipolaristas are receiving funds to promote this idea. Okay. And I have been also myself uh, offered money to promote multipolarism and Chinese technocracy. So I know, and I've been guests on streams where as soon by people where as soon as I started criticizing BRICS and mentioning how they're technocratic, they shut my mic. So I want to get this thing out of the way, which I think this cannot be denied. Now I can't point fingers and know conclusively who of these multipolaristas. Some of them I think are genuine, as you say, with their beliefs and ideas and hopes. But there are others that are receiving money from strange bagmen to promote these ideas. And then to some of the stuff you've brought up, I mean, is some semantics for me. So the idea, if it's globalist, I'm like, okay, if it's not globalist, it's totalitarian. You know, some of these structures. And if you study this technocracy, it's inherently totalitarian. So people say Putin is not a, I've got a Putin mug here I bought in St. Petersburg. Um, they say he's not globalist. Okay, he's totalitarian. For me, I don't care. I mean, um, I've been deplatformed by my Department of Homeland Security from PayPal, which affects my ability to make money. I've been taken off of Patreon by NATO. There's people in Europe now, Jacques Bod being taken. Same thing is happening in Russia and China. I lived in Kazakhstan. I've met old Kazakh man who was blacklisted because he was a labor rights activist, you know. And so you say, oh, social credit system is just register. Okay, there's no social credit system, but there's an algorithm ghetto. You see what I'm saying? It's a semantics. And I think for people who have not experienced directly, like myself, deplatforming from the state, you kind of brush it off. But once you have the state debank you, put you on the blacklist, then you're like, okay, this is not a walk in the park. And this is just the beginning. So if you, you know,
Allow
yeah.
me to add onto that. I have been deplatformed not by the state, but on various social media platforms. I can name some. Well, it was my bad for being on it. I was a student, but 9gag is an example. Multiple bans and shadow bans. Reddit is another, and so on. And just recently, just a few months ago, I lost a job as a teacher here in Switzerland. They didn't say it, but to me, it's rather obvious because I was using the 5-minute introduction where teachers are fairly free to do what they want to give them media competence exercises, which is not saying anything specific, just pointing to the inner contradictions within our mainstream media. And already that was bad enough to cost me my job in Switzerland, where I'm supposed to have academic freedom. And actually, if you look at the law, I was perfectly within my rights to do it. But yeah, so just and also COVID, right? So just to mention, yeah, I know what you mean. I have felt it, maybe not to the degree that you have from the state directly, but I know the dark Damocles sword above my head of potential of the architecture of totalitarianism and censorship.
And yeah, and so for me, there can be no getting out of it. BRICS building technocracy is it's totalitarian, and so every country is doing it. And then what's more, I've been saying for years, and don't get me wrong, my podcast was started Geopolitics and Empire. I mean, I have this above me from Ron Paul Institute, the sticker, and NATO terrorism.
I
Okay,
saw
so
it, yeah.
so it's not like I'm some pro-American empire person, you know. And I think the thing with the BRICS and multipolarity is that there are these genuine ideas of the Western Empire, as you said, for half a millennia, has done bad things to the global South. Like I'm not denying these truths, but I feel like if you actually study this idea of multipolarity, I've been saying for years. So I think alt media posits multipolarity as sort of a fight back, a counter,
Yeah,
right, to
yeah.
the globalist West.
That's how I feel about it too.
I disagree. I actually think it's step two and the advancement of the global West's plan for world commonwealth, as the Anglo-American establishment has said for a century, the everyone knows the Rhodes Group, the Milner, the Round Table, the Royal Institute. You look at their writings, they want HUL, said Democratic Socialist World State. So what's then happening with multipolarity? I've been saying for a year, and the Chinese papers confirm me. The Chinese papers themselves, China Daily, Global Times, I have said that multipolarity is a recalibration and upgrading of the global governance, the world government infrastructure. We had League of Nations, United Nations, and now they want a world government 3.0. Xi Jinping proposes global governance initiative. And I've literally the past months been seeing Chinese articles saying BRICS or multipolarity are the recalibrating of global governance. So by definition, they're saying we're upgrading world government. They're not saying we're against globalism. We're for globalism. They're just saying we want a better seat at the table. So you see what I'm saying? So this is how I view it, where Beijing and Brazil and Moscow, they're down with the Western globalist stuff. But up until now, the Western globalists have been trying to kick them off the table, to subjugate them, to take the resources of all these countries and then have the global South sort of under the table.
Yeah.
And then they'd be the rulers of the pie. But I think they've realized they can't go further, the Western globalists. So now they're sort of inviting them to the table, kind of like what you say, unhappily be like, shrug, like, okay, we're gonna let you sit at the table, but not get as much. Try to keep you from getting as little as possible. So that's kind of how I see it. Because Russia today, Pavel Durov just tweeted, Russia's trying to ban Telegram. They're banning WhatsApp. They want to install MaxApp, which is a model of the WeChat Chinese. India is trying to do the same thing. America's doing the same thing with Elon Musk is spearheading X. He just talked about X money. So he's building out the everything app in the West. So let's forget the term social credit. Algorithm ghetto. I had Edwin Black on 6 years ago. He calls it an algorithm ghetto. You can call it an electronic concentration camp.
No,
And
fair, fair.
so the problem will be, it won't matter whether you're in Mexico or Brazil or Croatia or Russia or China, you're going to have a global ministry of truth like Orwell. And you say something the government doesn't like, it doesn't matter which government, you'll get fined or go to jail.
Yeah.
And here in Mexico, it's happening. Also, someone criticized the government in Michoacan a few months ago, and they got arrested by the Mexican cybersecurity unit. One Mexican politician said, there was a man dressed as a woman, and the conservative Mexican politician rightfully said, "This man is a man. He's not a woman." And the Mexican government sued him. So, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like it becomes a moot point, and where we're headed in this direction, whatever it's called, I don't see it as being good. Of course, in the near term, I think the multipolar countries are going to experience more economic growth. Simon Dixon, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's done some good work,
I
but
don't
he
think I.
makes, because there's more ability for growth in Africa, in India, in Latin America, because the West has been spent. The costs are high for living, for everything, and we've been extracted completely.
Yeah.
And so that process will begin in the global South, and so people will get wealthier in the near term. But eventually, Simon Dixon says, those countries will also get to that point of full extraction. And in the long term, I believe that we'll all end up in the global algorithm ghetto.
Yeah. Okay. Now let me build on that, push back a little, but also push with it a little, because I'm really torn on this topic, because I have, maybe it's the whole part of me that still wants to kind of hang on to maybe multipolarity is the way to go. And so the way I would justify this hope slash belief, weak belief maybe, is the following way. So what you laid out is we have a lot of indicators of the architecture of totalitarianism. And Yanis Varoufakis, a former Greek finance minister, has a great term for it as well. I like algorithm ghetto. He has a more academic term, which is techno-feudalism, right? And so we do have that algorithm being built. And then again, my question is, what part of that is actually the desire to subjugate the world to an algorithm ghetto? What part of that is just societally inevitable, right? I'd say digital payments, maybe not central bank digital currencies, but at least forms of digital payments would be unavoidable. I would argue for that, just technologically speaking. But so what you framed before, the global governance, for example, program by China, I would argue that we do need a form of global governance without stripping too much of the local sovereignties, right? So that would argue towards all these states developing their own social media platforms. Like Russia has VKontakte, I believe. China has, I forget the name. The Americans dominate all the West, obviously. But that to me is a sign of the individual nations developing their own infrastructure, because social media is one of those unavoidable technological things, right? But if you don't give up the control to Washington, but you have it yourself, you do add to your sovereignty, right? So how can we know whether this is actually building towards technocratic totalitarianism and not just trying to update the UN so it actually upholds international law, has a fairer basis rather than the US dominating everything? How do you know how we can know?
Well, just to go back, I think we have to look at the track record of forecasting by
Okay.
analysts. And I would wager a lot of us looking at the multipolaristas, um, some of them haven't had a good track record forecasting events when they're talking about Ukraine or, Gaza or things like that. So I think we have to look to the people who are pretty good at forecasting where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
And then to what you're saying about how much tech is organic, I'd say it's both deliberate control and organic development. I mean, just before I logged on, I haven't had time to even look at the news and analysis. I'm just shocked. In the US, Democrats have introduced in Colorado a bill to require age verification for all operating systems, Linux and Windows. This
Wow.
is insane. So all flavors of Linux and Windows would require any user logging on. It's basically it's like a social credit thing. It's basically you'd have to, and it's unclear how they would do that. But just to my point, I think there's enough evidence to show, yes, we would have organically developed to a certain point in terms of technology, but not as far as we have if it hasn't been deliberate. And if you listen, like I'm listening to this every week, the Munich Security, the
Wow.
Davos, the World Government Summit, all these UN summits, you see these people come out and saying, we must. I've used cash my whole life. I've never used cards, just
Mm-hmm.
for many different principles. In Mexico, we have 80% cash use. In Canada and USA, 15, 16%. They keep coming out with schemes in Mexico. Cody, Dimi app, pay with your phone, whatever. Just stop using cash. So
Mm-hmm.
you can see that these governments, but it's a public-private partnership. It's not just government. So these private corporations and interests are incessantly, like above organic, trying to eliminate cash and impose digital ID, QR codes. They've said it themselves. Just 2 weeks ago, Scheinbaum just came out. We have like no one asked for it. We're all fine using cash. You know what I'm saying? Why? It's more convenient for me to use cash. It's more, I don't walk out with my smartphone often. And so you see what I'm saying? It's not organic. They're intentionally shoving down our throats these systems of control, I think, number one. And then number
Surveillance.
two, was that?
Surveillance.
Yeah, I mean it's ultimately they're building a prison. So for me, it's like inherently this techno feudalism. I call it neo techno feudalism. Joel Kotkin calls it neo feudalism. Varoufakis techno feudalism. Edwin Black, I mean, I've got his books behind me. He's a renowned scholar, so it's very academic as well. Algorithm ghetto. He's comparing it to the Jewish ghettos. So they're putting
Ah,
us in
okay.
algorithm ghettos like Jews were put in physical ghettos. Now that we're being put in digital physical ghettos, and you can be shut off, and the consequences will be the same in the digital ghetto as it was for the Jews in the physical ghettos. And then to my earlier point, COVID. Just let's look at COVID, which destroyed much of this myth of there being different poles. You know, I've interviewed the former Moldovan politician Yuri Roshka.
Mhm.
He used to be in with Dugin and other people, and he's like, it's all. This is the first time in history where we've had every government on the planet work in unison. And then when you see who's really running the government today, I'm using Mexico as an example. Who was telling the Mexican government to implement all of these policies? It wasn't the Mexican government. So there is an already right now, when you're talking about trying for the nation state to maintain its agency, I feel that train has already left. What do you call it? The building, because COVID demonstrated the local mayor here, the governor, the president of Mexico, they were being given orders, or it's who's on the ground. I already mentioned Rockefeller Foundation is here in Mexico telling
They're
the Mexican
everywhere.
government what to do. BlackRock, how many times has AMLO and Scheinbaum met with Larry Fink of BlackRock, and most recently together with Brendan Borge of Davos? That was like a few months ago. So you've got BlackRock, you've got McKinsey Consulting Company, you've got countless NGOs, UN agencies, you name it, banks. So I feel like that infrastructure, which is transnational, I can default, if you don't want to use some of these terms like globalism, I've interviewed the left-wing socialist communist professor William I. Robinson, who does excellent work, and he calls it this transnational class. So to be more academic, let's not use the term globalism, but effectively, they are the infrastructure running our government at a supranational level. And then where we're going is more centralization of power. So the EU is a regional government, right? And then that's what Putin has the Eurasian Union he's
Mhm.
promoting. And I found Klingendale, which is an academic institute. I don't know if you've heard of Klingendale. I used to follow them for a while. They're based in, I don't know, Netherlands or some Nordic country. They wrote an academic paper saying Eurasian Union is modeled on the European um, Union, and so you've got ASEAN, of course, and so all of this is inherently moving towards more centralization of power. And of course, in the near term, I guess it won't be so bad, but this system is going to have built within it any. Edward Snowden calls it turnkey tyranny. Remember Edward Snowden?
Yeah, I
He's
have.
talked about turnkey tyranny. So once the system is set up, maybe Xi Jinping goes and some hardliner comes in, or in Russia, or in USA, or in Mexico, and they just turn the key, and tyranny is at a press of a button imposed like we've never seen it before in the history of the world, because everything is um, digitized. So
Yeah.
I just don't see anything. If you have a Stockholm syndrome and will do whatever your government says, you won't have a problem. But there are many of us who say, no, I'm not going to inject myself. No, I'm not going to believe a man is a woman. There was
How how dare you think for yourself?
this week in Florida, a beauty pageant, a woman who won a beauty pageant, that the pageant, whatever you call it, the organization introduced in like the contract, you must sign, and one of the stipulations was that you agree that men can be women and women can be men, because in future pageants we can have trans, what do you call it, trans candidates. And she said, no, I'm not signing this, and they took away her crown.
Wow.
And then in Brazil, Reclaim the Net and others have reported that some, as a feminist, 5 years ago, she posted something where she said also she disagreed that a man can be a woman. And the Brazilian government has, I think, fined her, and she's possibly threatened and being with jail time. And this is BRICS, Brazil. You know what I'm saying? For thought
Yeah.
crime. So,
Well, I I'm Let me try to put it into my own words, what you just said, in maybe the following way. I would say, well, first a small pushback. I would say the existence of something does not equate to the equal amount. So if we look, for example, at the number of incarcerations based on social media posts per 100,000, then we have like UK, Germany, and somewhere down the list comes Russia, and then China with a bigger error bar because of the language barrier is, I think, even below Russia per 100,000. So the West is clearly leading, and I think if you amalgamate enough people, millions, like in countries, you will have these, well, tyrannically seeming transgressions just by mere stochastic appearances, right? That said, you just alluded to something which I hadn't thought of, which is pretty powerful, I'd say, which is, yeah, to put it back into my own words, we're building this architecture of tyranny. And it becomes, once all the pillars have been laid, it becomes this turnkey tyranny, as you said, or Snowden said, I guess. And so regardless of whether China is behaving nicely now and Russia is still way better than the West and all these arguments that I had more or less prepared and some examples, if you actually built this thing, then what is to prevent that turnkey from being turned, right? So yeah, there's that. This is definitely worrisome.
And
I
I mean, I would just add a qualifier. I think it's human nature. So it's global, it's universal. So I don't think in terms of East and West, of Washington, London, Brussels versus Beijing. This is human nature that's equally as applicable in Russia and China and Latin America. It's human nature. And what else was I going to say? Something that I've noticed. I've been to Russia. I've spent weeks there. I've lived in former Soviet Union, Kazakhstan. And often, if you spend enough time with the local population, as you do anywhere, I would reckon the feeling is the same, that they eschew their own government. So I would say the average Russian, I knew it was the case with the average Kazakh, with the average Croatian, with the average Mexican. They're all going to tell you, my Mexican government, it's corrupt, it's bad. The Russians will say the same. So I think it's a problem where of the grass is greener. We're sitting here, and if you're a foreigner, especially, and you go to Russia or China, foreigners or anywhere are treated better, right? Here in Mexico, if you're a foreigner, they will see you differently and treat you nicer.
yeah.
But that's kind of like a universal rule. I've felt that. I've lived in Mongolia, Kazakhstan. They just treat you nicer because you're a foreigner, you're a guest in the country. But if you talk to local Russians, they're going to be like, yeah, our government is an oligarchy. It's corrupt. They steal. So I've got Russian friends. They tell me this. It's kind of like, I think that's a strong point to be made, that the grass isn't really greener.
The grass isn't greener, yeah. Amen. You said it is human nature. I'm not so sure about that in the following sense. I have written an article where I take this international theory of realism propounded by, say, John Mearsheimer and others. Well, he has offensive realism by Morgenthau originally and then other scholars. Um, and I added psychology onto that because I am an avid reader of psychology. I find it fascinating to find the bugs in the human mind and so on. And I have found that individual values guide individual behavior. An amalgamation, well, taking together a bunch of individual minds leads to a culture or ideology, and that does drive policy and society. And so what I would say is it's not necessarily human nature, because if you consider, for example, or maybe it's a typical example, maybe you'll correct me for that, but if we take, for example, China, again, but not today's China, past China. China has been a continuous nation state for at least 2,500, well, 2.2 thousand years since the reunification under the Qin dynasty. And then altogether, maybe you can argue 5,000 years, depending on which historian you ask. And they had the technological advances which would have enabled them to practice colonialism, and yet they did not do so. And you can say similar things about the legacy of the Byzantine Empire. It is nowhere near as bloody and as conquest hungry and as I don't know, totalitarian, narcissistic as is the Western Empire. So I would argue that not necessarily human nature. I would say it's Western ideology, Protestant ethic nature.
Well, I mean, at that point, I would actually this because I'm a Protestant, but I've interviewed a guy called I've called his name was I forget his name now, Robert Woodbury. He did a scientific analysis of Africa, and he found that where there was a higher presence of Protestant sort of Christianity, there was a higher level of democratic development and economy. And I think the issue is people, there are many wolves in sheep's clothing. So people will use an example such as yours and George Bush. George Bush comes out and says, I'm a Protestant American Christian." George Bush, who's a member of Skull and Bones, and he says, "God told me to invade Iraq and murder millions of Iraqis." I'm like,
No,
you
he didn't.
cannot use that as an example of Protestant,
No, I don't mean that.
Christianity,
I
right?
mean Max Weber's Protestant ethics of you have to be fruitful. You have to be a profit is good, right? Profit is helps. That's what I mean. This under I think it's called Protestant ethic because it goes
Yeah,
back to
but I
Marx.
mean, it's that's all. There are so many. There's good and bad examples, and I don't have. How do I explain? That's Max Weber's interpretation, but all of my life I've attended Protestant churches across the planet, and we just you work hard, you help others. It's not this sort of idea, but what you're saying, I would what you said about China. Um, what I meant with human nature was I think there's a universal human nature that there is this. I come at it from unabashedly from a biblical perspective that there is this propensity to carry out evil, and I would agree with what you said when it comes to the culture at large being able to be influenced, right? And I've seen that here in Latin America. I've interviewed Emmanuel Rincon, who fled Venezuela. Now he lives in the U.S. And he said that by and large in Latin America, you have this sort of common culture
Hmm.
that is very collectivist, and it's actually keeping it from moving forward. To compare from the examples you're giving in China or Byzantium, here people are against guns. They are more statist, and even though they realize it's kind of a form of Stockholm syndrome, they realize the government is corrupt, but they still do what the government says. Because if you had uh, more legal gun rights, you'd have less crime, I believe, and things like that of that nature. But it's ingrained in the culture here, a lot of these elements of corruption that it's so hard to change because it has to be done at a collective cultural level. And yeah, I mean, yeah, your point is accurate. China was not um, imperial.
Hmm.
It could have been. So yeah.
Okay. Do you have a hard stop, or can I ask
No,
you
I
one
got
more?
time.
Okay,
I've
great.
got whatever
So
time you want.
I have I have heard you talk about our elites becoming more and more brazen, right? Trump is no longer hiding the whole empire thing under a veneer as did the previous administration. There's no longer these huge psyops and all. Well, there are still a lot of it, but not to the extent as we found it for the Iraq War, for example, right? So they just go, we gotta save those demonstrators in Iran. Just hang out, we're gonna help you. And as that fails, it's like back to the nuclear issue, right? And so I think I heard you said that the elites, I like the term globalists. Why not? They have reached such a level of power that they are almost at the turnkey point, right? So they're saying all that because they know they're going to win. What are you going to do, basically? They're telling us, what are you going to do about it? And so just to highlight that, I wanted to add that they have reached an actually impressive feat. So I talked to maybe not a lot, but well, let's say a lot of people my age, maybe a bit younger, like 20 some year olds. And I have realized that those people, I stand out for being interested in politics, right? I'm considered not fun at parties because I tend to go into the details of well, by some people, right? And so I'm thinking to myself, also in relation to well, maybe some family members, at least in the past, I was thinking of people, it has become trendy to be apathetic to politics. It's hip to say, I have no political affiliation. I don't care. I don't read the newspaper, etc., etc. And yet these people are, one, they're fully unaware of how that is actually a tool of power to make the young generation apathetic. And two, that the second you have values, you have a political affiliation, right? And then the worst part, which brings me back to Snowden, which I had nicely prepared for this talk, is Snowden revealed mass surveillance, unconstitutional on an incredible global scale, not just via phones, not just metadata, but also actual data. Your 3 microphones in your phone are constantly on, the camera you cannot control. And they're going all the way to introducing hardware backdoors into your CPU so that even if you run a Linux, as I have on my machines in part, you cannot escape it. And so that is already, that would throw a normal person off the chair, right? But it goes even worse because the people, they just shrug, throw their shoulders up, and are like, what do I have to hide? And I think that most people have either they put this whole fear of totalitarianism somewhere in a box which they don't touch ever. They don't want to talk about the architecture of totalitarianism like we've never seen it before, as you mentioned. Or two, there's a part of them that hopes that somehow things will remain as they are. Who cares about some targeted ads, right? And something will give and we'll just somehow avoid totalitarianism. Do you think we've reached that level where we're close to the turnkey and people are just going to be totally Huxleyan and be happy to be controlled?
I was just going to bring up Huxley. I think you
Yeah.
painted it. I think you painted it well. And like I said, you may have heard me. I live in my gated community, and I predicted 6 years ago. Like I've made so many of these exact forecasts. I said 6 years ago they're going to attempt to bring in an app and biometric exit and entry to the gated community. 3 months ago they did, and I was the only person who complained. And I said hell to the no. Um, the app died idea, and then they gave me a physical key for the biometric exit and entry. But that's kind of to prove your point that I call them, most of the people are, I use the term lemmings. I found it online, LLM inks, like
Oh,
LLM
learning.
inks,
Yeah.
you know, they
Limited
are,
liability or
no, language learning model, like LLM inks.
LLM. Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah.
And then they're, to use Varoufakis's term, I mean, they're to riff off his term, techno fascists in a sense, my neighbors, because they love the apps, they love everything. They love all of this technological totalitarian um, stuff, and they don't think twice about it. I just did an interview talking about CBP, DHS, and ICE, and with the pretext of the migration issue, they're building out uh, a domestic police state, like a form of Stasi in Nazi Germany, a Gestapo. They're building out. If you look at it from the individual parts, you don't see it. But once you realize CBP takes the border, ICE takes the interior, they're under the umbrella of DHS. You're having a federalized police force, and I have comments from people saying, "You're stupid. We have to get rid of the migrants." And I'm like, I'm not for keeping illegal people in, but neither. What did Benjamin Franklin say? Anyone who gives up their security, their liberty for security, deserves neither. And so you have Americans now saying we must give up our liberty for security. And I'm like, and I'm the crazy person. But to your point earlier, and I'm not sure with some of my assessments. When you say when I say the elites are close to their goal, I think in one way they are, but also they are at. I think it's both. They could be working out of desperation, right? Because they are so close,
Mm,
and more people are becoming aware. It's kind of like both people. You see the finish line, and both people realize, and now they're
yeah.
running to get there. Who's first? And one is the good, and one is the bad. And so it's kind of also that sort of moment where I think in general, this entire structure, again, if I look at it from a biblical perspective or also from a secular perspective, it's very precarious, this global technological system. Either way you cut it, I think ultimately it fails. I always come back to this argument. I've interviewed Jacob Nordengard. I don't know if you should have him on. He's an expert on this technological occult globalism. And he
Jacob, how?
says, Jacob Nordengard, he's in Sweden. He's written many books on it. Um,
You.
and it's like a Tower of Babel 2.0 they're building, but it's so opposite to human nature. And there's so many inputs, it's so complex, it will eventually fall in on itself. And from the biblical worldview, it says, at some point God just, flicks his finger and it all collapses. But the problem is, I think the Soviet Union was one of the early experiments by the globalists. There's Anthony Sutton and others who financed the Bolshevik Revolution to set up, let's say, this Soviet technate. And then the West did technology transfers to the Soviet Union to assist it. And it failed, but for 70 years, people had to, some of them were disappeared, right? Some of them were thrown in the gulag. In Kazakhstan, they told me that their church, when they started a century ago, in the Soviet Union, they got enough money and they built a house, and the Soviet government came and took it over. Then they years later, built again the house, and they came and burned it down. And then, decades later, in the 40s or 50s, they came and took all of the men, the 30 men, and disappeared them, and were never seen again. And so, yeah, I think the danger is how long this sort of system would last. So I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, the question is whether it's stable or unstable in nature. I'm not sure about that. Um, what else do I have? I have one last question, I think, for you. I think then we can close it off. Maybe it's a big one. I hope not too big. So you, I did not know that about yourself, but since you mentioned you were a Protestant and you mentioned the Bible a couple of times, I take it you have a faith. I mean, you're actually practicing Christ in that case, right? Right? Okay, so you must be much more aware about what's the word? There's I'm missing the word, a word for religious spirituality. That's the word. So you're much more in touch with your
Metaphysics
spirituality.
or
No, just spirituality than me probably. And so on that line, can you maybe elaborate on what you know about the occult, like the cult role, the spiritual cult role in the elites? Because that is something that I cannot wrap my mind around it. I would imagine some unimaginable billionaire somewhere at Rockefeller sitting on some Epstein-like island and plotting about how to take over the world. But what does it have to do with all these cults? Do they need the symbology? Do they do the hierarchy among them, or what is it?
I mean, you referenced my use of the term earlier of occultocracy.
Yes.
That's not my term, so that's from Mark Passio. I don't know if you know Mark Passio, but Mark Passio is an ex-Satanist. So he was actually in the Church of Satan for many years, and he came out of it, and now he's speaking against all of these things. And he coined the term, we're ruled by, he says, an occultocracy, and he says a technocratic occultocracy, that their ultimate goal is a world government that's technocratic and totalitarian. And he says it's not just one group. He says the people who say it's the Jews, you're idiots. And I think my conclusion that it's, if you're going to have the whole planet, you're going to have most of the key managing groups under your umbrella. So obviously there is a Zionist lobby, right? So I think they're plugged in. The Vatican, the Jesuits, the Rothschilds, the Saudi lobby, the whatever Chinese lobby or a Russian. And so the occultocracy, again, I come at it from an academic perspective. I was, as you mentioned earlier, for a year, my graduate studies in Geneva, 2008-9. I don't know if you've heard about the group called Lucis Trust. Lucis Trust.
I don't think I have, no.
So I think a lot of and Nordengard talks about this as well as others, the underlying occult philosophy is theosophic. So in the 1800s, you had Helena Blavatsky. And then following Blavatsky was a woman called Alice Bailey. And in 1922, she founded an organization that was originally named Lucifer Publishing. They changed the name to Lucis Trust. They have three offices: New York, London, and Geneva. And they are an official UN affiliated NGO. And I went to one of their meetings in 2009 in Geneva, May, Arcane School, and it says Lucis Trust over here. And you go to their own. Here it talks about Prometheus and Lucifer. So they believe that Lucifer of the Bible is Prometheus, bringing fire to man, helping man to become God. And they say they promote United Nations, World Economic Forum, and they're promoting one world government. And they say that Lucifer is the good guy. He's the Christ. That he is the Maitreya to the Eastern religions, he's the Mahdi to the Muslims, and he's the Christ to the Christians. And us Christians are like, no, he's the Antichrist. And they say themselves that Lucifer, they use different terms for the same thing. They say Lucifer or the one, he's here now, or what's the phrase that they use? The Christ. He's here now. This figure who's going to fix everything. This is in their own terminology. It's a
But,
UNNG, and they say,
excuse me, just to wrap my mind around this. They claim he's the good guy because he teaches humanity fire and therefore will become independent. Is that the logic of it?
I mean, they're. I mean, I'm not. I don't have a PhD on theosophy, but effectively, they inverse the Bible. They say we are gods. They talk about like universal consciousness type stuff, planetary consciousness, and then they say Lucifer is the good guy, God of the Bible is the bad guy, and that this figure is here now on Earth to unify the world, but we have to sort of prepare you to accept him because you have these stumbling blocks of Christian belief and other beliefs. So they're kind of what they're saying. They also use the phrase externalization of the hierarchy, and they use phrases like ascended master. So there are these ascended masters, these spirits or teachers, and she said around the year 2025 this stuff would start to happen, and this hierarchy, this occult hierarchy, would begin to externalize to get us to go along with these ideas to bring about a world government. Because you see, this is a problem. There's many people like myself and others who don't want a global centralized system, and so what they're doing is, and I think a lot of the UFO stuff has to do with that. You're seeing these just yesterday, Pete Hegseth talking about aliens and Trump and everybody. And so they're also working on a universalist religion, a new world religion. And there you can find countless, UN events, all, participating in these. It's ecumenism, right? Bringing all. Baha'i is an ideal. Baha'i is also, Baha'i?
Yeah, actually, it's from this Persian, well, Iranian modern religion. It's only appeared like in the 70s or something. So I forget the name of it, but yeah, I've heard of Baha'i.
They have seven temples in the planet. One is in Chicago, which I visited like 25 years ago, and they basically want to bring all of the world's religions together. And then to your earlier point, occult, Scientology is a big one, and a lot of the intelligence agency work is steeped in this occultism. And just examples you can see are you read books about Aleister Crowley. I've got one behind me about how Aleister Crowley was a British intelligence asset, and then Scientology is, and the Mormons are very much tight with the intelligence community. And then you read the book of Dave McGowan, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, on how the sex, drugs, and rock and roll movement was basically manufactured by the military and intelligence in conjunction with these cults. How is it a coincidence that Jim Morrison's father was like Navy, military, and all of the rest of these rockers, all of their parents were military people? Like at some point, you kind of say like Jim Morrison, Frank Zappa, was it Credence? You go on like, how is this? Something's going on, So
But why are these super elites? I mean, why does, like, if they want to create a world religion to control people, fine. but it seems like they themselves practice these rituals, right? Like I don't know, I've heard strange stories about the Epstein people sacrificing humans and maybe eating them.
Marina, I mean, Crowley alluded to that in his own
Yeah.
writings that his communion was excrement. It was the inverse of the Bible. And then there were discussion of actually sacrifice of they did animals, but of humans as well, way back when. So if they're doing that back when, now, Marina Abramovich, her, she's eh, linked to these people and doing those sorts of things.
But so do you think the reason is that these people are actually, well, you said they have to be plugged into all religions of the world, right? Do you think they seem that they're all in this satanic occult ring? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, or are we just not getting enough information on that?
What do you mean all? You mean all politicians or?
No, like the level 6, level 5 elites, those that actually pull the strings.
I mean, like I said earlier, I think using the alt media multipolar um, co-option example, even among the elites, like when I was in Geneva, I find that most people attracted to power are sociopathic, psychopathic, narcissistic, and opportunists. And
Amen.
so again, I would make it as a spectrum. You don't have to have everyone being some occult Satanist. You just have people that are narcissistic who want money and power. So, and they'll do whatever it takes just to keep that money and power. They don't necessarily have to be part of a, secret. They will police themselves. So I think there's plenty of those people in power that know I have to keep doing what they tell me or I'll be kicked out. But I had a classmate in Geneva who was from Gabon, Africa, and I was talking about Freemasonry as one example. It's a network, it's an occult network. And he said his uncle had tried to start to get into politics in Gabon, and he could not unless he became a Freemason. So that's an example of it's sort of a filtering system. And then if you study just a bit of Freemasonry, you look at in the US, it's like a network, it's a business network, it's a government network. They help each other. And it's kind of like if you also don't become a Freemason, you will not have very much success. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say there's layers. And even under, if you use Freemasonry as an example, there's 33 degrees. I would wager there are a lot of useful idiots. So a lot of people that join the bottom rung, they're doing it just to be part of this network, to get better jobs, and they're told you have to believe in the creator, the grand architect. But then when I'm studying this stuff, it talks about a great architect. And then you come across Freemasons themselves talking about the grand architect is Lucifer. I'm like, okay, like Albert Pike, like it's literally in their own language. And so it's kind of like, but most people down below, like you said earlier, they just want to suppress that and like they don't want to think about it. They just want to enjoy the practical comforts,
Yeah, tell me
right?
what you
And
think. I don't want to do it myself.
yeah, so it's kind of like again, and I think that's human nature. People just anything that's inconvenient, they suppress it and just like la la la, everything's fine. You know that meme of the guy of the coffee, the meme where the room is on fire and he's drinking coffee and everything's
Everything's
fine.
fine, yeah. So, Hrvoje, thank you for that. Well, let us finish on a more positive note than Lucifer, right? Um, how do we get out of this? What is your solution? What do you propose? Like, well, let's say for people like me or maybe younger, what can we do for a better world? Like, if even the whole multipolarity thing is not something we can steep our hopes in, right? Because it's actually being controlled and it's also laying out all the bricks, the foundation for a totalitarian techno algorithm ghetto. Where do we go from here? What can we do? Like we said before that we might have to actually know all the 6 layers to fix the problem. You need to understand it before you can fix it. But this puts an incredible burden of knowledge for everyday citizens to fix it. So do you have something for us?
I think we have to. I think as a historian, I think and what you're doing, we have to always look to the past, to
Mhm.
history, to the heroes, and read them. They give us tools as well. Teddy Roosevelt, I'm thinking of. Yes, he was an imperialist, okay, but I think we can't just paint We have to take it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So take the
Don't
good.
throw out the baby with the bathwater, right?
Exactly. And Teddy Roosevelt, the man in the arena. And a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, it gives me vigor. We have to become men and women in the arena. And I'm still running off of a little bit of adrenaline from Sunday, where I'm driving to church and passing 4 narco blockades. And on the way home, I'm driving. It's a ghost town, and there was the real danger. Narcos could have stopped us, and I'm with my family. And they weren't targeting civilians, but sometimes accidents happen. They could have burned and killed us all, but they would tell us to get out of the car, and they would burn our vehicle. And so that kind of invigorates me. I'm a little crazy. I'm from Chicago, which is the homicide capital, murder capital of America. And technically, when I was a child, we moved to Croatia while the war was still going on in
Mm.
1994. So I'm like narco, whatever. I'm used to Chicago, Croatian War. But I think we all have to be, in light of everything we're discussing, be invigorated, not be afraid, have courage and bravery, and like what you're doing in your professional life. I just had a job interview, and the issue was it was an American school, and I believe I didn't get the job because of the similar situation as yours. In a global South school, I don't have problems. I get hired I got offered a job in China last year, in Dubai, and
That's because
Azerbaijan.
that's because you still have good social credit.
Well, yes, and because I'm against the liberal globalism. So I'm highly employable. I believe in the global South,
Mhm.
despite everything we're talking about. But the liberal globalist American mind sees me as a conspiracy theorist. So I think we need to be just never afraid, and we need more courage. We need more bravery. Just keep speaking out. And despite of the things that we're talking about at the big level, we can still affect. I think, there will be times maybe where I'll be surprised where we make breakthroughs, whether it's in Russia, in the local government, maybe at a national level, in China, where, someone at my church, our deacon said last Sunday, we don't pray enough, which is a biblical principle, for our leaders, even if they are bad. You know
Mm.
what I'm saying? And whether, if you're not Christian, okay, but you can petition them, right? In a nice way. You can get involved and somehow just be a force for good to, even in a tiny level, change the trajectory of history for a positive way. So I don't see, I'm not here like depressed. Um, I'm just reconnaissance, assessing the lay of the land to better understand it, to better forecast it, and then seeing what we can do collectively. To in one hand, to protect myself, and then tell others, hey, this is what maybe you should do to get out of the way. Uh, I'm not one for. I don't have the energy or passion to get into politics at all,
Yeah,
but I'm
I
I'm
feel you.
sure there are people out there that maybe and you need money. I don't have
No, you
money,
need
but
money. You need money and you need sleaziness, right? You need
yes,
to
but
do all
also
these lies. I
you
feel
you
like.
you you do, but I think you could also not need sleaziness if you were wealthy, if
Ah,
you had money and you wanted to speak truth to power. See, that's the problem. We have few of these good elites, right? And maybe I've interviewed like Thierry Baudet, um, of the Dutch, party, and I think he has money. Or I've interviewed the aide to Michael Arbon in Australia, who's the advisor to Senator Babbitt, and I think both of them are self-made men. And then if you're in that position, you have more ammunition to speak truth to power because it's harder to cancel you because you have money. And so those are examples maybe of good elites. So we need more good elites with a conscience and less of these sort of Epstein-like um, people. So I would say all hope is not lost. We just, we're in the fight. It's a battle in many ways, spiritual, economic, literal, physical, whether it's here in Mexico or Ukraine or Gaza.
mm.
So just be of good cheer and just fight against evil and see what happens, you know?
Courage and good elites and absolutely have vigor in it. Well, thank you for your contribution to that, Hrvoje. I had a whole lot more, but maybe we can do another time. And where can people follow you besides the invaluable Geopolitics and Empire.com that you have? A lot to scroll through, lots of articles, countless interviews, a lot of. It's an encyclopedia on there. So where can people follow you besides that?
I mean, if they go to the website and then people are very siloed today because of the censorship, right? And so they can become members on Substack. We do weekly calls. I mean, every few weeks, calls off the record with supporters. I do a weekly analysis, and then I'm active on X and Telegram and LinkedIn, and I post Facebook, even though it's kind of zombied. So I'm all over. I'm all over the place. Where people are Gab, but not many people on there, and some wacky people on there as well. So, but yeah.
Those are good places. Well, thank you, Hrvoje. Have a hopefully good and safe day. I hope things have calmed down around you. And well, see you next time.
Thanks for having me on.
Bye.